Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. You're embarrassing this family, David, and I won't tolerate it anymore. The words hit David Chun like a physical blow as he stood frozen at the head of the mahogany conference table, his quarterly presentation still glowing on the wall-mounted screen behind him. 22 pairs of eyes stared back at him from around the table, some with shock, others with barely concealed satisfaction. But it was the cold satisfaction in Richard Blackwood's steel-gray eyes that made David's stomach drop into free fall. This can't be happening, David thought, his mind racing as he tried to process what he'd just heard. Asterisk not here. Not in front of everyone, asterisk. Sir, David began, but Richard's raised hand silenced him with the authority of a man who'd built a $12 billion empire from nothing. 5 years, Richard continued, his voice carrying the kind of quiet menace that made grown men reconsider their life choices. 5 years I've watched you coast on mediocrity while married to my daughter. 5 years of hoping you'd prove worthy of the Blackwood name. He stood slowly, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the boardroom, despite the floor-to-ceiling windows flooding the space with afternoon sunlight. I'm done hoping. David felt heat creep up his neck, knowing that everyone in this room, vice presidents, department heads, people he'd worked alongside for years, was witnessing his professional execution. The irony wasn't lost on him that his presentation had just outlined the most successful quarter in his division's history. 3 major acquisitions closed. Revenue up 47%. Industry recognition for innovation. None of it mattered now. You're terminated, effective immediately, Richard announced, each word precise and final. Security will escort you out. The silence that followed was deafening. David could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, could feel sweat beginning to form despite the air conditioning. He thought of Elena, probably at home making dinner plans for tonight, having no idea that her husband's career was being destroyed by her own father. He thought of their mortgage, their plans to start a family, the life they'd built that was suddenly crashing down around him. But mostly, he thought about the USB drive in his pocket. The USB drive containing the financial discrepancies he'd discovered 3 weeks ago. The irregularities in Richard's private investment accounts that didn't match the public filings. The reason he'd requested this emergency board meeting in the first place, disguised as a quarterly review. Richard didn't know about the USB drive. Yet, actually, a voice said from the far end of the table, cutting through the tension like a knife. I think we need to hear what David was really here to present. All heads turned toward Marcus Rivera, the chief financial officer and David's closest ally in the company. Marcus had been with Blackwood Industries for 15 years, had built his reputation on fierce loyalty and uncompromising ethics. His dark eyes met David's across the table, and in that moment, David realized Marcus knew about the USB drive too. Richard's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but David caught it, a flicker of something that might have been concern. The presentation is over, Marcus. David is no longer employed here. The presentation about the Cayman Islands accounts? Marcus asked, his voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. The ones that don't appear in our official audit reports? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. David watched as several board members exchanged glances, as whispered conversations began at the far end of the table. Sarah Kim, the head of legal, was suddenly very interested in her notes. Thomas Wright, who oversaw operations, had gone pale. These weren't just random executives. These were the people who'd helped David build cases, who'd provided access, who'd been quietly feeding him information for months because they'd noticed the same discrepancies he had. They were the ones who'd encouraged him to bring this to the board, even knowing it meant going against Richard Blackwood himself. They were also the people who stood to lose everything if Richard decided to clean house. I think, Marcus said, standing slowly, that David's presentation deserves a proper hearing. From a properly constituted board. Without conflicts of interest. Richard's face had gone from dismissive to dangerous. Sit down, Marcus. You're out of line. No, said another voice. Sarah Kim was standing now too, her laptop closed, her legal pad tucked under her arm. I don't think he is. Then Thomas Wright stood. Then Jennifer Lopez from marketing. Then Ahmed Hassan from international development. One by one, like dominoes falling in reverse, they rose from their chairs. David watched in stunned amazement as 22 executives, people with families, mortgages, careers to protect, stood in solidarity with a man who'd just been fired. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice cracked like a whip, but for the first time since David had known him, there was uncertainty beneath the authority. "We're resigning," Marcus said simply. "Effective immediately. All of us." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. David felt the world tilt sideways as he realized what was happening. These people weren't just supporting him, they were betting their entire futures on him. On the truth he was about to reveal. On the USB drive in his pocket that could bring down Richard Blackwood forever. Richard's eyes found David's across the chaos of the boardroom, and David saw something there he'd never seen before: fear. Not the controlled concern of a businessman managing risk, but the raw, desperate fear of a man who suddenly realized he might lose everything. "You have no idea what you've just done," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. David reached into his pocket and pulled out the USB drive, holding it up so everyone could see. "Actually," he said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded, "I think I do." Welcome to a story about power, family, and the price of standing up for what's right. You're about to discover that sometimes the biggest betrayals come from those closest to us, and sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected places. The room erupted into chaos as Richard lunged forward, but Marcus was already moving, already positioning himself between David and his father-in-law. The 22 executives began filing toward the door, their resignation letters, apparently prepared in advance, landing on the conference table like autumn leaves. But David wasn't watching them. He was watching Richard Blackwood, billionaire patriarch, destroyer of careers, his own father-in-law, as the man's carefully constructed empire began to crumble around him. And somewhere in the back of his mind, David realized this was only the beginning. 20 minutes later, David sat in his Honda Civic in the parking garage beneath Blackwood Tower, his hands still shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. The USB drive lay on the passenger seat like a loaded gun, and his phone buzzed constantly with messages from the 22 executives who'd just destroyed their careers for him. Why did they do it? The question echoed in his mind as he stared up at the concrete ceiling. Why would they risk everything for someone like me? The answer lay in a story that began 6 years ago, when David Chun was a nobody from Queens with an accounting degree and a dream that felt impossibly big. 6 years earlier, Elena Blackwood had been crying in the Columbia University Library at 2 a.m., her organic chemistry textbook splayed open to a chapter that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. She was pre-med third-generation Blackwood, heir to a fortune that came with expectations heavier than the designer handbag she carried everywhere. David had been there because the library was the only place he could afford to study. His scholarship covered tuition, but not much else. He worked 3 part-time jobs: campus IT support, weekend bookkeeping for a local restaurant, and tutoring undergrads in statistics. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Excuse me," he'd said, approaching her table with the kind of careful politeness that came from years of knowing he didn't belong in spaces like this. "Are you okay?" She'd looked up with eyes the color of storm clouds, mascara slightly smudged, and David had felt something shift in his chest. Not just attraction, though Elena Blackwood was undeniably beautiful, but recognition. He saw in her the same exhaustion he felt, the same weight of expectations that threatened to crush anyone who carried them. "I'm fine," she'd lied, then immediately contradicted herself by burying her face in her hands. "No, I'm not fine. I'm failing organic chemistry. My father expects me to get into Harvard Medical School, and I haven't slept in 36 hours. David had pulled out the chair across from her without invitation. "What if I told you there was a way to make organic chemistry make sense?" That was how it started. Study sessions that turned into coffee dates. Coffee dates that turned into long walks through Central Park, where Elena could pretend to be just another college student, not the daughter of Richard Blackwood. David had been her escape from a world of board meetings and charity galas, and she had been his glimpse into a life he'd never dared imagine. But even then, David had sensed the shadows lurking beneath Elena's perfect exterior. The way she flinched when her phone rang and her father's name appeared. The careful way she spoke about family dinner plans, as if each word might detonate a landmine. The nights she showed up at his cramped studio apartment with bruises on her wrists that she claimed came from tennis. "He has very specific ideas about what my life should look like," she'd explained one night, curled up against David's chest in his second-hand bed. "About who I should marry, what I should study, how I should spend every minute of every day." "What do you want?" David had asked. "I want to help people," she'd whispered. "I want to be a doctor who works in free clinics, who doesn't care if patients can pay. I want to marry for love, not strategic advantage. I want to disappoint my father in all the best ways." David had kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her expensive shampoo, and promised himself he'd help her do exactly that. He'd had no idea that Richard Blackwood was already planning to destroy him. Present day. David's phone buzzed again. This time it was Elena. Asterisk heard what happened. "Dad's furious. Coming home now. We need to talk." Asterisk. David closed his eyes, remembering their wedding day 4 years ago. Richard had paid for everything. The venue, the flowers, the 7-course dinner for 300 guests David had never met. He'd walked Elena down the aisle with a smile that never reached his eyes, and when the officiant asked if anyone objected to the union, David had half expected Richard to raise his hand. Instead, Richard had played the role of proud father perfectly. He'd given a toast about family and tradition. He'd offered David a job at Blackwood Industries, starting in a junior analyst position with the promise of advancement for the right candidate. What David hadn't known then was that Richard had already investigated every aspect of his life. Had discovered David's mother's medical debt, his father's gambling addiction, the financial pressures that kept David working multiple jobs just to survive. Richard knew exactly which buttons to push. The job offer came with a signing bonus large enough to pay off David's student loans and his mother's chemotherapy bills. The advancement came with performance targets that seemed designed to set David up for failure. The quarterly reviews included subtle comments about David's cultural fit and leadership potential that always felt like veiled threats. But David had worked harder than anyone else in the company. He'd arrived first, left last, and treated every project like his family's survival depended on it. Because it did. He'd earned respect through competence and built loyalty through authenticity. He'd been the one people came to when they needed problems solved or difficult conversations navigated. He'd also been the one they came to when they noticed things that didn't add up. Marcus Rivera had been the first to approach him, 6 months ago, in the executive parking garage after a particularly tense budget meeting. "David, can I ask you something?" Marcus had said, his voice carefully neutral. "Have you ever noticed discrepancies in the Cayman accounts?" David had felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind that suggest money is being moved through shell companies. The kind that don't match what we're reporting to shareholders." Marcus had looked around to make sure they were alone. "The kind that could land us all in federal prison if anyone found out." That conversation had led to others. Sarah Kim from legal had noticed irregularities in foreign investment documentation. Thomas Wright had questioned transfer protocols that bypassed normal oversight. Ahmed Hassan had discovered subsidiary companies that existed only on paper. One by one, they'd brought their concerns to David, not because he was the highest ranking among them, but because he was the only one they trusted to do something about it. David had a reputation for integrity that was rare in corporate America. Partly because he'd never forgotten what it felt like to have nothing, and partly because he genuinely believed that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting your own career. It had taken David 3 months to compile the evidence. 3 months of late nights, encrypted communications, and carefully documented financial trails. 3 months of knowing that if Richard discovered what he was doing, it wouldn't just cost David his job. It would probably cost him his marriage. Because Elena didn't know about any of it. David's phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. Elena's name appeared on the screen, but when he answered, it wasn't Elena's voice he heard. "Hello, David." Richard Blackwood's voice was calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its politeness. "Where's Elena?" David demanded. "Elena is fine. She's here with me, actually. We're having a conversation about family loyalty and the consequences of betrayal." There was a pause, filled with implications David didn't want to consider. "I think you should join us." "What do you want, Richard?" "I want my USB drive back. I want you to call your 22 friends and convince them to return to work. And I want you to understand that there are things more important than your misguided sense of righteousness." David felt ice forming in his veins. "What are you talking about?" "Elena's medical records make for interesting reading," Richard said conversationally. Did you know she's been seeing a psychiatrist for the past year? Dr. Rebecca Torres, very discreet, very expensive. Apparently, Elena has been struggling with some rather serious depression. Suicidal ideation, according to the notes. You're lying. The prescriptions are quite real. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, sleeping pills. Quite a dangerous combination if someone were to accidentally take too many. Richard's voice remained perfectly level, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings. It would be such a tragedy. The stress of her husband's betrayal, the public humiliation of his accusations against her father. A young woman with a history of mental health struggles might do something impulsive. David's vision went white around the edges. If you hurt her, I would never hurt my daughter, David. But I also can't protect her from the consequences of your actions. Come home. Bring the drive. We'll discuss this like family. The line went dead, leaving David alone in the parking garage with the horrible realization that his war against Richard Blackwood had just become something much more personal and much more dangerous. As he started his car and pulled onto the street, David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, don't trust him. Elena found the medical records. She knows what he's been doing to her. The pills aren't for depression. M asterisk. Marcus. But how did Marcus know about Elena's medical records? And what did he mean the pills weren't for depression? David's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he realized that the 22 executives who'd resigned with him might not be the only ones keeping secrets. The biggest betrayal of all might be waiting for him at home. Because if Elena had been drugged, if Richard had been controlling her mental state for months or years, then everything David thought he knew about his marriage was a lie. And the woman he'd been trying to protect might be the key to bringing her father down. Asterisk, the game has changed completely. What started as corporate corruption has become something far more sinister. A family conspiracy that reaches into the most intimate corners of David's life. But the question that will haunt you through the next act is this. How long has Elena known what her father has been doing? And which side is she really on? Asterisk. David's key turned in the lock of their Westchester home with a sound like a coffin closing. The house he'd helped Elena choose 2 years ago, modest by Blackwood standards, enormous by his, felt like foreign territory as he stepped inside. Every family photo on the hallway table seemed to mock him now. Every wedding picture whispered questions about what had been real and what had been performance. Elena, he called out, but the silence that answered him was heavier than absence. It was the kind of silence that came from people holding their breath. He found them in the living room. Elena sat curled in the corner of their cream-colored sofa, still wearing the pale blue dress she'd put on for her book club meeting that morning, a lifetime ago, before David's world imploded. But something was wrong with the picture. Her hands were shaking slightly, and her eyes had the glassy, unfocused look David had learned to recognize over the past year. The look he'd attributed to stress and overwork. The look that, he now realized, might have been something else entirely. Richard stood by the stone fireplace, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the chaos of the afternoon, his charcoal suit showing no wrinkles from the boardroom confrontation. He looked like a man in complete control of his environment, except for his eyes. His eyes were the eyes of a cornered predator. "Hello, son," Richard said, the word son carrying enough venom to kill a horse. "I was just explaining to Elena how your little presentation today was nothing more than industrial espionage dressed up as whistleblowing." David took a step into the room, his attention focused entirely on his wife. "Elena, are you okay?" She looked up at him then, and David's heart stopped. Because in her storm-gray eyes, he saw something he'd never seen before, clarity. Not the medication-dulled confusion he'd grown accustomed to, but sharp, desperate awareness. "He's been drugging me, David." Her voice was steady, but David could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "For 2 years. The pills he said were for anxiety and depression. They're not what he told me they were." Richard's expression didn't change, but David caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Elena has been struggling with some very serious mental health issues. It's unfortunate that she's having another episode today, but benzodiazepines and mood stabilizers," Elena continued, her gaze never leaving David's face. "High doses. Enough to keep me compliant, confused, easier to control. Dr. Torres isn't a psychiatrist. She's a family friend who owes Dad several very large favors." The room tilted around David as the implications crashed over him. Every evening when Elena seemed distant, every morning when she struggled to remember conversations from the night before, Every time she'd agreed to something that seemed out of character, it hadn't been depression or stress. It had been chemical control. "You bastard," David whispered, turning to face Richard. "You've been drugging your own daughter." "I've been protecting my daughter," Richard shot back, his mask of civility finally slipping. "From herself, from her poor choices, from people like you who would destroy everything our family has built." Elena's not a child. She's a grown woman with her own mind. Elena's mind has always been her weakness. Richard's voice cracked like a whip. She was 17 when she decided she wanted to help people instead of learning the business. 18 when she announced she was going to medical school to work in free clinics. 19 when she brought home her first boyfriend, a Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx whose father worked construction. David felt Elena flinch beside him, but Richard wasn't finished. "Do you know what happened to that boyfriend, David? Carlos Rivera? He got a full scholarship to Stanford. A generous benefactor who wished to remain anonymous. Strange how often talented young men find anonymous benefactors right after they stop dating my daughter." The name hit David like a physical blow. "Rivera. Carlos Rivera. Marcus Rivera." "Marcus is Elena's ex-boyfriend," David said, the pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. Richard's smile was thin and satisfied. "Marcus is Elena's ex-boyfriend who I've had working in my company for 15 years, keeping a very close eye on Elena's social circles, including her husband." David's mind reeled. Marcus, who'd approached him about the financial discrepancies. Marcus, who'd encouraged him to compile evidence. Marcus, who'd stood up in the boardroom and convinced 22 executives to resign in solidarity. Marcus, who'd just sent him a text warning him not to trust Richard. "But Carlos doesn't know about the medication," Elena said quietly. "He thinks he's been protecting me by feeding Dad information about my relationships. He doesn't know Dad's been chemically controlling me." "Wait," David said, his brain struggling to process the layers of deception. "If Marcus has been reporting to Richard, then why did he help me gather evidence against him? Why did he organize the mass resignation?" Richard's confident expression faltered for the first time. "What?" Elena sat up straighter, and David saw something he hadn't seen in months. His wife's natural intelligence burning through the pharmaceutical fog. "Because I asked him to." The silence that followed was deafening. 3 months ago, I started skipping doses," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger. "Just 1 day a week at first, then 2. Enough to think clearly, to start remembering things. Enough to notice that my medical records didn't match what I was experiencing. Enough to realize that my own father had been stealing 2 years of my life." David sank into the chair across from her, overwhelmed. "You've been aware this whole time?" "Not the whole time, but long enough to contact Carlos. Long enough to ask him to help me gather evidence. Long enough to realize that the only way to stop Dad was to let him think he was still in control while we built a case against him." Richard's face had gone ashen. "Elena, you don't understand the forces you're playing with. The business deals, the international contracts, the people who depend on. The people who depend on you laundering money through offshore accounts." Elena stood up, and David was amazed to see her steady on her feet despite everything. "The people who depend on you bribing foreign officials and falsifying environmental impact reports? The people who depend on you drugging your own daughter to keep her compliant. Everything I've done has been to protect this family." "No," Elena said, her voice cutting through Richard's bluster like a blade. "Everything you've done has been to protect your power, even when it meant destroying the people you claim to love." David watched this confrontation between father and daughter with growing horror and admiration. Elena, his Elena, the woman he'd fallen in love with 6 years ago, was fully present for the first time in their marriage. And she was magnificent. But she was also in terrible danger. "Elena," Richard said, his voice dropping to the tone David recognized as his most dangerous, "I think you need to take your medication. You're clearly having an episode." Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small prescription bottle. As he moved toward Elena, David saw something that made his blood freeze. A syringe. "No," David said, stepping between them. "She's not taking anything. David, you don't understand. Without her medication, Elena becomes delusional, violent. She tried to hurt herself before." "Liar!" Elena's voice was fierce. "I never tried to hurt myself. You had me committed for 3 days when I was 19 because I refused to break up with Carlos. You told everyone I was suicidal, but the only danger I was in was from you." Richard's mask dropped completely. The syringe was in his hand now, clearly visible, and his eyes held the flat, desperate look of a man who'd run out of options. Elena will take her medication, he said quietly. David will destroy the USB drive and retract his accusations. The 22 executives will return to work tomorrow morning with a story about a misunderstanding that's been resolved. And we will never speak of this again. And if we refuse? David asked, though he already knew the answer. If you refuse, Elena will have a very public nervous breakdown. She'll be hospitalized for her own safety. During her treatment, she'll unfortunately suffer complications from her existing mental health medications. Very tragic, very believable, and very permanent. David felt the world crystallize around him with perfect, terrible clarity. This was the moment. This was the point where everything would be decided, where choices would be made that couldn't be unmade. He could give Richard the USB drive. He could call Marcus and the other executives, convince them to return to work, let Richard's crimes remain hidden. He could watch Elena disappear back into pharmaceutical fog, could pretend their marriage was real, could live with the knowledge that he'd chosen his wife's life over justice. Or he could fight. He could refuse to give up the evidence, could trust that Marcus and the 22 executives would stand with him, could bet everything on the hope that love and truth were stronger than money and power. But if he was wrong, Elena would die. Choose, Richard said, holding up the syringe. Your wife's life, or your principles. David looked at Elena, saw her watching him with eyes that were clear and bright and full of trust. She believed in him. She believed he would find a way to save them both. The problem was David had no idea how. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text message. From Marcus. Asterisk, 22 executives plus Elena's medical records plus FBI Financial Crimes Unit equals checkmate. Elena's wearing a wire. Everything's been recorded. Choose love, David. Choose truth. We've got your back. Asterisk. David looked at Elena again and saw it. The tiny microphone clipped to her dress like a piece of jewelry. She'd been recording everything. Richard was still holding the syringe, still waiting for David's answer, completely unaware that his threats and admissions had been broadcast to federal investigators. David smiled, pulled out the USB drive, and held it up for Richard to see. Then he dropped it on the hardwood floor and crushed it under his heel. You're right, Richard, David said calmly. Family is everything. Richard's face lit up with triumph for approximately 3 seconds, until the front door exploded inward and FBI agents swarmed into the room. Elena was already moving, tackling her father to the ground before he could use the syringe on himself or anyone else. The woman David married was back, and she was done being anyone's victim. As federal agents read Richard Blackwood his rights, David realized that the point of no return hadn't been a choice between his wife and his principles. It had been the moment he decided to trust the people who believed in him. The moment he chose to believe that love was stronger than fear. Asterisk, but this victory comes with a cost that David is only beginning to understand. Because bringing down Richard Blackwood means unleashing forces that will tear apart not just a company, but an entire way of life. And some enemies are more dangerous when they're cornered than when they're in control. Asterisk. 72 hours later. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. David sat across from Special Agent Victoria Santos, a woman whose sharp brown eyes seemed to catalog every micro-expression on his face as she reviewed the case file that had consumed her team for the past 3 days. Your father-in-law made bail this morning, she said without preamble. $10 million cash. He's currently under house arrest at his estate in the Hamptons, pending trial. David felt his stomach drop. How is that possible? You have him on tape threatening to kill Elena. We have him on tape threatening to medicate his daughter against her will. His lawyers are arguing that was a concerned father dealing with a mentally unstable child. Agent Santos leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. They've produced medical records going back 5 years showing Elena's history of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. All signed by Dr. Rebecca Torres, who suddenly developed amnesia about her relationship with the Blackwood family. But Elena's testimony is compromised by the fact that she admits to being under the influence of prescription medications during the time period in question. A defense attorney's dream. Santos pulled out another file, thicker than the first. The financial crimes are more promising, but Richard's legal team is already claiming that any irregularities were the result of rogue employees acting without his knowledge. David's blood chilled. They're blaming the executives who resigned. 22 former employees with access to financial systems, all of whom quit on the same day, all of whom are known associates of the primary whistleblower. Santos spread crime scene photos across the table, not of violence, but of financial documents, bank records, offshore account statements. From a prosecutor's perspective, it's a compelling narrative. Disgruntled employees frame their boss after being caught in their own embezzlement scheme. That's insane. These people destroyed their careers to expose Richard's crimes. These people destroyed their careers after David Chun, Richard Blackwood's son-in-law, convinced them to participate in what looks increasingly like an elaborate fraud. Santos fixed David with a stare that could cut glass. Tell me, Mr. Chun, what did you promise them? Positions in a new company? A share of the money they helped you steal? David stared at her in disbelief. I didn't promise them anything. I didn't steal anything. Then explain this. Santos slid a bank statement across the table. David recognized the account number. It was his personal checking account. But the balance made his vision blur. $2.3 million. Deposited in 3 installments over the past 2 months. I've never seen this money before in my life, David whispered. Funny thing about money laundering, Mr. Chun. It leaves a trail. And this trail leads right back to the Cayman Islands accounts you claim Richard was using illegally. Santos pulled out another document. Purchase agreement for a house in Costa Rica, signed by you 6 weeks ago. Funny timing, don't you think? Right around when you started gathering evidence against your father-in-law. David's hands were shaking now. Someone's setting me up. Richard has to be. Richard Blackwood was in Switzerland 6 weeks ago, giving a speech at the World Economic Forum, documented by about 300 witnesses and international media. Santos gathered the papers back into a neat pile. Meanwhile, you were supposedly building a case against him while secretly preparing to flee the country with money stolen from his company. The walls of the interview room seemed to be closing in. David realized with growing horror that he was no longer the whistleblower in this story. He was becoming the prime suspect. Where's Elena? He asked desperately. I need to speak to my wife. Santos's expression softened slightly, but not in a way that offered comfort. Elena Blackwood has retained separate counsel. She's not taking visitors at this time. Meanwhile, Westchester County. Elena stood in the bathroom of the house she'd shared with David for 2 years, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time in months, her eyes were clear. No pharmaceutical haze, no confusion about what day it was or what conversation she'd had the night before. She looked like herself again. She also looked like a stranger. The woman in the mirror had sharper cheekbones than she remembered, shadows under her eyes that spoke of battles fought and barely won. Her hand was steady as she reached for her phone, but her heart was racing as she dialed a number she'd memorized but never called. Elena. Marcus Rivera's voice carried relief and wariness in equal measure. Are you okay? I heard about David's arrest. They arrested David? Elena's knees went weak, and she sank onto the edge of the bathtub. When? This morning. Financial fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. It's all over the news. Marcus's voice was careful, controlled. Elena, we need to talk. In person. There are things about your father's operation that go deeper than what we found. I can't. My father's lawyers have advised me not to have contact with anyone involved in the case. Your father's lawyers are protecting your father, not you. Marcus's voice carried an urgency that made Elena's stomach tighten. Elena, the money they found in David's account, it didn't come from the Cayman Islands. It came from somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that makes this whole situation much more dangerous than we thought. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choices she didn't understand yet. What do you mean? Your father wasn't just stealing from his own company. He was laundering money for people who make him look like a choir boy. And if David goes down for this, if he's convicted of interfering with their operation, they won't just destroy his life. They'll eliminate him entirely. The bathroom suddenly felt airless. Who are they? The kind of people who don't leave loose ends. The kind of people your father has been working with for 15 years, moving their money through legitimate business channels. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Elena, your father may be in federal custody, but his partners are still free. And they think David stole from them. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Asterisk, your husband has something that belongs to us. You have 48 hours to return it, or both of you will discover what happens to thieves. The USB drive David destroyed was a copy. Find the original. Asterisk. Her blood turned to ice. Marcus, someone just. Don't say anything else over the phone. Meet me tonight. The old library at Columbia, our usual spot from college. Come alone, and make sure you're not followed. The line went dead, leaving Elena staring at her reflection again. But this time, the woman in the mirror looked terrified, because she realized she didn't know where the original USB drive was. She didn't even know if David had made copies. She'd been so focused on exposing her father's crimes that she'd never considered the possibility that those crimes were just the surface layer of something much darker. Something that could get them both killed. FBI field office, 3 hours later. David sat in a holding cell that smelled like disinfectant and despair, his mind racing through everything that had gone wrong. The 22 executives who'd resigned with him were being arrested one by one, charged with conspiracy and fraud. The evidence he'd carefully compiled over months had been turned into proof of his own guilt. And somewhere out there, Elena was dealing with the fallout alone. His court-appointed attorney, a harried-looking woman named Jennifer Park, sat across from him in the consultation room with news that made David's situation even worse. "The prosecution is offering a deal," she said, spreading papers across the metal table. "Plead guilty to financial fraud and conspiracy, serve 8 to 12 years, and they'll drop the charges against your wife." Charges against Elena? What charges? Conspiracy, aiding and abetting, accessory after the fact. Apparently, the prosecution believes she was aware of your activities and helped cover them up. Jennifer's expression was grim. They have evidence that she's been in contact with Marcus Rivera for months, coordinating what they're calling a systematic attack on Blackwood Industries. David laughed bitterly. She was gathering evidence against her father, not helping me steal from him. The prosecution sees it differently. Elena's medical records show she was prescribed mood stabilizers and anxiety medication, but she admits to not taking them regularly for the past several months. They're arguing that she deliberately went off her medication to participate in your scheme, and that her claims about being drugged are part of an elaborate deception. This is insane. Elena was the victim, not the perpetrator. Elena was the primary beneficiary of a trust fund worth $40 million. A trust fund that would have been frozen if her father was convicted of financial crimes. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping. From the outside, this looks like a daughter and son-in-law working together to steal from the family business before anyone could stop them. David felt the walls closing in again. Every piece of evidence, every truth they'd uncovered, was being twisted into a narrative that painted him and Elena as the criminals. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "The FBI searched your house this morning. They found another USB drive hidden in your wife's jewelry box. This one contains financial records going back 10 years. All encrypted with your personal password. I don't have another USB drive. I destroyed the only one I had. The drive they found has your fingerprints on it. It contains evidence of money laundering operations involving dozens of international clients, including some very dangerous people." Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. "David, if this goes to trial, if these people think you're going to expose their financial networks, you won't live to see the verdict." David stared at the table, trying to process the impossible situation. Someone had planted evidence in his house. Someone had set up bank accounts in his name. Someone had orchestrated an elaborate frame job that made him look guilty of crimes he'd never committed. But the only person with the resources and connections to pull off something this sophisticated was Richard Blackwood, and Richard was under house arrest. Unless Richard wasn't working alone. Unless the real criminals were still free, still manipulating the situation from the shadows. "I need to speak to Elena," David said desperately. "She's in danger. We're both in danger from people who don't care about legal proceedings or evidence or truth. Elena's not taking visitors. Her new legal team has advised complete isolation while they prepare her defense." "Her new legal team?" Jennifer consulted her notes. "Hartman, Pierce & Associates. Very expensive. Very connected. They specialize in defending high-profile white-collar cases." David's blood went cold. "Who's paying for Elena's lawyers?" "I assumed you knew. The bills are being paid by the Blackwood Family Foundation. Richard Blackwood is funding his daughter's defense." The room spun around David as he realized the horrible truth. Elena wasn't being protected by expensive lawyers. She was being isolated, controlled, cut off from anyone who might help her see what was really happening. Richard might be under house arrest, but he was still pulling the strings. And Elena, thinking she was finally free from her father's manipulation, had walked right back into his trap. David's phone privileges had been revoked, his communication with the outside world severed. Elena was surrounded by lawyers whose loyalty belonged to her father. The 22 executives were either in custody or in hiding. And somewhere out there, people who made Richard Blackwood look like an amateur were deciding whether David and Elena would live to see another week. For the first time since this nightmare began, David realized that the truth might not be enough to save them. Because sometimes the truth just makes you a more dangerous target. The Blackwood estate, same evening. Richard Blackwood sat in his study, ankle monitor clearly visible above his Italian leather shoes, speaking quietly into an encrypted phone. Outside, FBI surveillance vans maintained their vigil, but inside, Richard was conducting business as usual. "The situation is contained," he said to the voice on the other end. "David has been neutralized, Elena is under control, and the financial networks remain secure." A pause, then Richard's expression hardened. "Yes, I understand the consequences of failure. But I've been managing complications for 40 years. My daughter and her husband are not going to bring down an operation that generates $2 billion annually." Another pause, longer this time. "Of course I can handle my own family. Elena has always been idealistic, but she's not stupid. Once she realizes that David's life depends on her cooperation, she'll do exactly what I tell her to do." Richard walked to the window, watching the FBI surveillance team in their van, completely unaware that the real criminals had never been arrested at all. David Chin will either take the plea deal and disappear into federal prison, or he'll have an unfortunate accident while in custody. Either way, he stops being our problem. A final pause, then Richard smiled with cold satisfaction. "Trust me, I've been planning for this contingency since the day Elena brought him home. Every move they've made, every alliance they've formed, every piece of evidence they think they've gathered, it's all been part of a larger game they never knew they were playing." He hung up the phone and poured himself a scotch, toasting his reflection in the window. "Game, set, match," he whispered to the night. But what Richard didn't know was that Elena wasn't at home being protected by his lawyers. She was sitting in a Columbia University library with her first love, learning about the true scope of her father's crimes. And the original USB drive, the one that contained evidence that could bring down not just Richard, but his international partners, wasn't hidden in Elena's jewelry box. It was in a safety deposit box that only Marcus Rivera knew about, waiting for the right moment to destroy everything Richard had built. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. Asterisk, the noose is tightening around David and Elena, but they're not the only ones with secrets. As the pressure builds from multiple directions, alliances will be tested, loyalties will be questioned, and someone close to them will make a choice that changes everything. Asterisk. Columbia University Library, 11:47 p.m. Elena pulled her hood up as she climbed the steps to the library where she'd first met David 6 years ago. The building was officially closed, but Marcus had texted her the security code, the same one they'd used when they were students sneaking in for late-night study sessions. Some things never changed. Others changed in ways that destroyed everything you thought you knew about the world. The library felt like a mausoleum at night, all shadows and whispered memories. Elena made her way to the third floor, to the corner study room where she'd cried over organic chemistry textbooks while Marcus tutored her through the complexities of molecular bonds. Back when she thought the most complicated thing in her life was balancing chemical equations. She found Marcus sitting at their old table, looking exactly like he had 15 years ago, except for the silver threading through his dark hair and the lines around his eyes that spoke of burdens she was only beginning to understand. "Elena." He stood when she entered, and for a moment she was 19 again, sneaking out of her father's house to meet the boy who made her believe in possibilities beyond the Blackwood Empire. "Thank God you're safe." She let him embrace her, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne, feeling the solid warmth of his arms around her. For the first time in days, she felt protected. "Marcus, what's happening?" "The FBI agent said David's been arrested for stealing money, but that's impossible. David would never." "David didn't steal anything," Marcus said gently, guiding her to sit down. "But he's been set up by people who are very good at making innocent people look guilty." Elena sank into the chair across from him, the same chair where she'd first admitted she was falling in love with someone else. "You said on the phone that this goes deeper than my father's crimes. What did you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light filtering through the library windows. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Elena's stomach tighten with dread. "Elena, How much do you know about why your father really wanted to control your medication? To keep me compliant. To make me easier to manipulate. That's part of it. But not all of it. Marcus reached across the table and took her hands, his touch familiar and comforting. Your father has been laundering money for some very dangerous people for the past 15 years. The Cayman Islands accounts David discovered were just the visible layer. The real operation involves moving money for international arms dealers, human traffickers, drug cartels, people who don't leave witnesses. Elena felt ice forming in her veins. How do you know all this? Because I've been investigating it for 5 years. Not for the FBI, not for any law enforcement agency. For myself. Marcus's grip on her hands tightened. Elena, your father had my brother killed. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Carlos wasn't my real name when we met in college. It was the name I took when I went into hiding after my family was murdered. My real name is Miguel Santos. My brother was Special Agent Roberto Santos, DEA. He was investigating a money laundering operation in Miami when he was killed in what looked like a random car accident. Elena stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was telling her. Santos. Agent Victoria Santos. My sister. The FBI agent handling David's case. We've been working together for years to build a case against the people who killed our brother. Marcus's eyes were dark with old grief and newer determination. Your father was one of them. The study room felt like it was tilting around Elena. You've been lying to me for 15 years. I've been protecting you for 15 years. From your father, from his associates, from the truth about what kind of man you were living with. Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent. Elena, the medication your father was giving you wasn't just to keep you compliant. It was to keep you safe. Safe from what? From being used as leverage against him. Richard's partners know he has a daughter. They know she's his weakness. As long as you were medicated, confused, seemingly mentally unstable, you weren't a useful target. You were just Richard's troubled daughter, who couldn't be trusted with important information. Elena pulled her hands away from his, her mind racing. So you're saying my father was drugging me to protect me? I'm saying your father was drugging you because dead daughters can't be used as blackmail material, but living daughters who know too much can. Marcus's voice was steady, but Elena could see the pain in his eyes. Elena, the people your father works with don't just kill witnesses. They kill families. They kill anyone who might have information that could hurt them. And you think they'll kill me? I know they will. Because 3 days ago, when David exposed those financial records, he didn't just threaten your father's freedom. He threatened a $2 billion money laundering operation that keeps some of the world's most dangerous criminals out of prison. Elena felt her world reshaping itself around her with sickening speed. The text message I received, about returning what David stole. They don't want money back. They want the original USB drive that contains 15 years of financial records, client lists, and operational details. The drive that could put their entire network in federal prison for life. Marcus stood up, beginning to pace the small room. David doesn't have it. He never had it. But they think he does, which means they'll keep escalating until they get what they want. Where is it? The original drive. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. That's what I need to tell you, Elena. That's why I asked you to meet me here. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black device that looked exactly like the USB drive David had destroyed in their living room 3 days ago. This contains everything. Every transaction, every client, every detail of the operation that killed my brother and destroyed my family. He held it up so Elena could see it clearly. I've been building this case for 5 years, gathering evidence, documenting crimes, waiting for the right moment to bring them all down. Elena stared at the drive, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. You used David. You manipulated him into thinking he was exposing my father, when really you were using him to flush out the bigger operation. David was never supposed to get arrested. The plan was for him to present the evidence, force Richard into a position where he'd have to choose between protecting himself and protecting his partners. Then we'd have recordings of Richard trying to contact them, trying to warn them, trying to coordinate a response. But something went wrong. Everything went wrong. Marcus sat back down, his shoulders sagging. Richard was smarter than we expected. Instead of panicking, he turned the whole situation around and made David look like the criminal. Now David's in federal custody, you're isolated and vulnerable, and the real criminals think you have information that could destroy them. Elena felt tears burning her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. You destroyed David's life. You destroyed our marriage. You used me to get close to information about my father, and you used David to trigger a confrontation that you knew would put us both in danger. Elena, I never meant for you to get hurt. I've been trying to protect you. You've been using me. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For 15 years, you've been using me. First in college, making me believe you loved me while you were really just trying to get close to my father. Then when you broke up with me and disappeared, I thought it was because you couldn't handle the pressure of dating a Blackwood. But really, you were just moving to the next phase of your plan. Marcus's face crumpled. Elena, my feelings for you were real. They are real. Everything I've done has been to try to bring justice for my brother while keeping you safe. Safe? Elena laughed bitterly. I'm married to a man who's been framed for crimes he didn't commit. I'm being hunted by international criminals who think I have information I don't have. My father is under arrest, my life is destroyed, and you're telling me this was all to keep me safe. There's more, Marcus said quietly. Something you need to know before you walk away from here. Elena paused, her hand on the door handle. What? The 22 executives who resigned with David? They weren't acting out of loyalty to him. They were my people. Agents, informants, undercover investigators who've been placed in Blackwood Industries over the past 5 years. The mass resignation was planned to make it look like David had built a network of co-conspirators. The betrayal hit Elena like a sledgehammer. David had no idea. David believed he was inspiring people to do the right thing. In reality, he was walking into a trap that I helped design. Marcus's voice was barely audible. Elena, I've done terrible things in the name of justice. I've destroyed innocent people to get to guilty ones. I've used everyone who ever trusted me, including you. Elena turned back to face him, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that made him step backwards. You're still using me, she said with deadly quiet. Right now. This conversation, this meeting, this confession, it's all part of another plan, isn't it? Marcus's silence was answer enough. What do you want from me, Marcus? What's the real reason you brought me here? He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a second device. Not a USB drive this time, but a small digital recorder. I need you to call your father. I need you to tell him that you have the original drive, that you're willing to trade it for David's freedom. I need him to contact his partners, to arrange a meeting, to give us the recordings we need to bring down the entire network. You want me to be bait. I want you to help me finish what we started. What your husband started when he decided to do the right thing. Elena stared at the recorder, understanding that this was the moment that would define the rest of her life. She could walk away, try to disappear, hope that David could survive federal prison, and that the international criminals would eventually lose interest in hunting them. Or she could trust the man who'd been lying to her for 15 years, the man who'd systematically destroyed everyone she'd ever loved in the name of a justice that felt increasingly indistinguishable from revenge. If I do this, she said slowly, what guarantee do I have that David will be safe? What guarantee do I have that you won't sacrifice him the same way you've sacrificed everyone else? Marcus met her eyes, and for the first time in their conversation, Elena saw something that looked like truth. You don't have any guarantees, Elena. You never did. From the moment you were born into the Blackwood family, your life was never going to be safe or simple or fair. The only choice you have is whether you want to be a victim of this story or the one who writes the ending. Elena took the recorder from his hand, feeling its weight like a weapon. If David dies because of this plan, she said quietly, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you join him. Marcus nodded, accepting the threat as his due. If David dies because of this plan, I'll probably beat you to it. Elena dialed her father's number, put the call on speaker, and pressed record. When Richard Blackwood answered, his voice was thick with sleep and irritation. Elena? It's past midnight. What? I have something you want, Dad. Something that belongs to your friends. And I'm ready to make a deal. As her father's breathing changed, as she heard him moving through his house despite his ankle monitor, Elena realized that the scared girl who'd cried over chemistry textbooks in this same room was gone forever. In her place was a woman who'd learned that sometimes the only way to save the person you love is to become the thing you've always feared. The thing that could destroy everyone around her, including herself. Meanwhile, Federal Detention Center. David sat in his cell, staring at the ceiling, unaware that his wife was about to sacrifice everything to save him. unaware that the man who'd claimed to be his ally had been orchestrating his destruction from the beginning. Unaware that in 36 hours he would have to choose between Elena's life and bringing down the criminals who'd murdered an innocent DEA agent 5 years ago. But mostly, unaware that Elena had just become the most dangerous person in a game where the stakes were measured in billions of dollars and human lives. The midpoint devastation was complete. Everything David and Elena thought they knew about their lives, their marriage, their allies, and their enemies had been revealed as carefully constructed lies. And the real game, the one that would determine whether love could survive absolute betrayal, was just beginning. The foundation of everything has crumbled. Trust has been weaponized, love has been manipulated, and the people David and Elena thought were protecting them have been using them all along. But sometimes the greatest betrayals create the clearest vision of what really matters. The Blackwood Estate, 12:23 a.m. Richard Blackwood sat in his home office, the ankle monitor's red light blinking in the darkness like a mechanical heartbeat. The phone call with Elena had ended 20 minutes ago, but he hadn't moved from his desk. His hands were perfectly still, folded over the encrypted phone that would either save his empire or destroy what remained of his family. The conversation had been brief. Elena claimed to have the original USB drive. She wanted David released and all charges dropped in exchange for the evidence that could put Richard's partners in federal prison for life. She'd given him 12 hours to arrange the trade. What Elena didn't know was that her father had been expecting this call for 5 years. "Miguel Santos," Richard said quietly to the empty room. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize the little boy who used to stare at my house from across the street, planning his revenge?" He picked up the encrypted phone and dialed a number he'd memorized but hoped never to use. "It's Blackwood. The endgame has begun." The voice that answered was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its lack of emotion. "Mr. Blackwood, we've been expecting your call. Elena has the drive. She wants to trade it for her husband's freedom." "Elena doesn't have the drive. Miguel Santos has the drive. Elena is being used as bait to force us into a position where we'll be recorded making incriminating statements." A pause. "We've been monitoring Agent Santos and her brother for 3 years, Mr. Blackwood. This entire operation has been conducted under our supervision." Richard felt his blood chill. "What are you saying?" "We're saying that your daughter and son-in-law are about to become casualties in a war they never understood they were fighting. The question is whether you'll be joining them." Federal Detention Center, 6:30 a.m. David woke to the sound of his cell door opening. It wasn't breakfast time, wasn't exercise time, wasn't visiting hours. The guard standing in his doorway looked nervous, which made David's stomach clench with dread. "Chun, you've got a visitor." David was escorted through a series of corridors he'd never seen before, past cells and processing areas that felt darker and more dangerous than the general population wing where he'd been housed. The visiting room they brought him to wasn't the standard glass partition setup for family visits. It was a small concrete room with a metal table and 2 chairs. The man waiting for him wasn't a lawyer. He was tall, thin, immaculately dressed in a gray suit that probably cost more than David's annual salary. His face was unremarkable except for his eyes, which held the flat, predatory stillness of a shark. "Mr. Chun, my name is Alexander Petrov. I represent certain business interests that your father-in-law has been servicing for the past several years." David remained standing, every instinct screaming at him to get as far away from this man as possible. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please sit. We have a great deal to discuss and very little time." Petrov's voice carried a slight accent that David couldn't place, but the politeness felt more threatening than overt menace would have. "Your wife contacted your father-in-law last night. She claims to have information that belongs to us. Information that we're very eager to recover. Elena doesn't have anything that belongs to you. Elena has a USB drive containing 15 years of financial records that document our business relationship with Richard Blackwood. She's proposing to trade this information for your freedom." Petrov smiled, and David felt his skin crawl. "She seems to believe that exposing our operations will somehow result in justice for you and punishment for us." David sat down slowly, understanding that he was looking at one of the people Marcus had been hunting. One of the criminals responsible for murdering a federal agent. "What do you want from me?" "We want you to call your wife and convince her to return our property. Quietly, without involving federal agents or recording devices or elaborate schemes to gather evidence against us." Petrov reached into his jacket and pulled out a phone. "One phone call, Mr. Chin. You tell Elena to give the drive to her father, and we ensure that you both live to see your next anniversary. And if I refuse, then Elena will discover that the meeting she's planning with her father is actually a meeting with us. And meetings with us, Mr. Chun, rarely end with all participants walking away." David stared at the phone, realizing with growing horror that Elena was walking into a trap that had been prepared long before she'd ever called Richard last night. "Elena thinks she's saving me," he said quietly. "Elena is about to get you both killed. Unless you convince her otherwise." Petrov slid the phone across the table. "Choose quickly, Mr. Chin. Elena's meeting with her father is scheduled for this evening. We'd prefer to resolve this matter peacefully, but we have contingencies in place if peaceful resolution proves impossible." David picked up the phone, his hands shaking. Elena's number was already programmed in. All he had to do was call her, tell her to give up the evidence, let the criminals escape justice to save their own lives. All he had to do was betray everything he'd been fighting for. "One more thing, Mr. Chin." Petrov's voice stopped David's finger from pressing the call button. "Your wife is not the only person whose safety depends on your cooperation. Your mother, Mrs. Sarah Chun, lives at 47 Maple Street in Flushing. Your sister Jennifer works at Roosevelt Elementary School in Queens. Your nephew Tommy attends kindergarten at the same school." The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in David's hands. Elena made her choice when she decided to play games with dangerous people. "But your family, Mr. Chun, they're innocent. They don't deserve to suffer for your wife's mistakes." David closed his eyes, seeing his nephew's 5-year-old face, his sister who'd sacrificed so much to put herself through teaching school, his mother who'd worked double shifts for 30 years to give her children better lives than she'd had. "Make the call, Mr. Chin. Save everyone you can save." Columbia University, 3:17 p.m. Elena sat in the same library study room where she'd met Marcus the night before, but this time she wasn't waiting for him. She was waiting for her father. The plan was simple. Richard would come to retrieve the USB drive, believing he was meeting Elena alone. But Marcus would be recording everything from the next room, and FBI agents would be positioned throughout the building. When Richard contacted his partners to arrange the handover, they'd have the evidence they needed to bring down the entire network. Simple plans, Elena was learning, had a way of becoming catastrophically complicated. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. *, something's wrong. FBI surveillance on your father went dark an hour ago. He's not at the estate. *. Elena felt ice forming in her stomach. *, what do you mean went dark? *, the surveillance team isn't responding. Their van is empty. Elena, you need to get out of there now. *. But as Elena stood to leave, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Multiple sets of footsteps, moving with military precision. Not the casual shuffle of students or the hurried pace of professors. The deliberate, coordinated movement of people who knew exactly where they were going and what they planned to do when they got there. Elena moved to the window, looking down at the street below. 3 black SUVs were parked outside the library. Men in expensive suits stood at strategic positions around the building's entrances. Her phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. "David?" she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Elena, listen to me very carefully." David's voice was tight with strain. "You need to get out of that building right now. Don't trust Marcus, don't trust the FBI, don't trust anyone. These people aren't just criminals, they're something much worse." "David, what's happening? Where are you?" "I'm still in federal detention, but Elena, they got to me. They know about the meeting with your father. They know about Marcus's plan. They've been watching everything from the beginning." Elena heard footsteps in the hallway getting closer. "David, I can't leave. There are men outside the building." "Elena, listen to me. The USB drive, the real one, it's not just evidence of money laundering. It contains information about human trafficking operations, arms deals with terrorist organizations, contracts for political assassinations. We're not dealing with white-collar criminals. We're dealing with people who eliminate entire families to protect their secrets." The study room door handle turned slowly. "David, someone's coming. Elena, I love you. Whatever happens next, remember that everything I did was to protect." The line went dead. Elena stared at her phone as 3 men entered the study room. They wore the kind of understated expensive clothes that screamed money and power, but their eyes held the cold efficiency of professional killers. The man in the center, tall, thin, with prematurely gray hair and a face that belonged in corporate boardrooms, smiled at her with the warmth of a reptile. "Ms. Blackwood, I'm Alexander Petrov. I believe you have something that belongs to us." Elena backed toward the window, her mind racing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The USB drive, Ms. Blackwood. The one you used to threaten your father last night. The one you believe contains evidence that will bring justice to corrupt businessmen." Petrov stepped closer, and Elena could smell his expensive cologne. "What you don't understand is that justice is a luxury we can't afford to permit. The FBI knows I'm here. They're recording everything. The FBI agents who were supposed to protect you are currently indisposed. Agent Victoria Santos is in a hospital room, unconscious from what appears to be a drug overdose. Very tragic. Very convenient." Petrov's smile widened. "As for your friend Miguel, he's about to discover that 15 years of planning can be undone in 15 minutes. Elena felt the window behind her, realized she was trapped. "What do you want?" "We want the original USB drive. We want Miguel Santos and anyone else who's seen its contents. And we want the assurance that this unfortunate situation will never be repeated." "I don't have the drive. Marcus has it. Marcus is about to give it to us. Along with you." Petrov nodded to one of his companions, who produced a syringe filled with clear liquid. "This will make you more cooperative during our conversation with Mr. Santos." Elena thought of David, alone in a federal detention cell, facing threats against his family. She thought of Marcus, whose quest for justice had turned into a revenge fantasy that was about to get them all killed. She thought of her father, whose crimes had exposed them all to dangers beyond anything she'd imagined. But mostly, she thought of the choice David had made 6 years ago, when he'd approached a crying girl in a library and offered to help her understand organic chemistry. The choice to do the right thing, even when it was dangerous. Even when it was stupid. Even when it would probably get them both killed. Elena grabbed the desk lamp and swung it at Petrov's head with all the strength she had. The lamp connected with a satisfying crunch, and Petrov staggered backward, blood streaming down his face. Elena dove for the door, but the other 2 men were already moving, already blocking her escape. She made it 3 steps before the syringe found her neck. As consciousness faded, Elena heard Petrov's voice, distorted and distant. "Bring Miguel Santos. Tell him we have his princess. Tell him it's time to finish the game his brother started 5 years ago." The last thing Elena saw before the drugs took her was her phone, buzzing with a text message from David. ** Elena, I'm sorry. I had to choose between you and my family. I chose family. Forgive me. ** Federal Detention Center, same time. David sat in his cell, staring at the phone Petrov had let him keep after the call. The text he'd just sent to Elena would make her think he'd abandoned her, that he'd chosen his family's safety over hers. It was a lie. David had refused to make the call Petrov demanded. He'd told Petrov to go to hell, and accepted that his refusal would probably cost Elena her life. But Petrov had made the mistake of underestimating David's understanding of his wife. Elena was brilliant. Elena was resourceful. Elena would see through the fake text message and realize that David would never abandon her, not even to save his own family. She would know that the text was a signal, a warning that the plan had been compromised. She would know to run. At least, David hoped she would. Because sitting in his federal detention cell, with no way to contact the outside world, and no way to help the woman he loved, hope was all he had left. Hope that Elena was smarter than their enemies. Hope that Marcus's plan, despite being compromised, might still work. Hope that love was stronger than money, more powerful than fear, more enduring than the kind of evil that destroyed innocent families for profit. But as the hours passed without word from Elena, without news from the outside world, without any sign that the situation was anything other than a complete disaster, David began to understand what true despair felt like. It felt like watching the person you love most walk into a trap you're powerless to prevent. It felt like knowing that every choice you'd made in the name of justice had led to the destruction of everyone you cared about. It felt like realizing that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't lead to triumph. Sometimes it just leads to more suffering. And sometimes the only victory available is the knowledge that you loved someone enough to die for them, even when dying couldn't save them. Unknown location, 11:43 p.m. Elena woke up in a room that smelled like metal and fear. Her head throbbed from whatever they'd injected her with, and her wrists were zip-tied to a chair that felt bolted to the floor. Across from her, Marcus sat in an identical chair, his face bruised and bloody, his eyes filled with the kind of despair that came from watching 15 years of planning collapse in a single day. Elena. His voice was thick with grief and guilt. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. Where are we? I don't know. They grabbed me outside my apartment, brought me here. Said they had you, said they'd kill you if I didn't give them the drive. Elena looked around the room. Concrete walls, no windows, a single door with what looked like an electronic lock. Industrial lighting that cast harsh shadows and made everything look like a crime scene. Did you give it to them? Marcus's silence was answer enough. So it's over, Elena said quietly. They have the evidence, they have us, and David thinks I'm dead. David doesn't think you're dead. David knows you're in trouble, and he's probably doing something incredibly stupid to try to save you. Despite everything, Elena almost smiled. That sounds like David. The door opened, and Alexander Petrov entered, looking significantly less polished than he had in the library. A bandage covered the gash on his forehead where Elena had hit him with the lamp, and his expression suggested that he was no longer interested in maintaining the pretense of civilized conversation. Ms. Blackwood. Mr. Santos. I trust you're both comfortable. What do you want? Marcus asked. What I've always wanted. The complete elimination of threats to our organization. Petrov pulled out a tablet and showed them a video feed. Your sister, Agent Santos, is awake and has been asking about you, Miguel. We thought you might like to say goodbye. The screen showed Victoria Santos in what looked like a hospital room, but Elena could see armed men stationed outside the door. Not guards protecting a patient. Guards holding a prisoner. Victoria had nothing to do with this, Marcus said desperately. She was just following my leads. Victoria Santos has been investigating our operations for 5 years. She's compiled evidence that could disrupt business relationships worth billions of dollars. She's also the only federal agent with jurisdiction who can't be bought, threatened, or eliminated through normal channels. Petrov's smile was winter cold. But everyone has family, Mr. Santos. Everyone has someone they love more than justice. The screen switched to another feed. David's mother, walking out of her house in Flushing, unaware of the car following her. David's sister, picking up her son from school, not noticing the man watching from across the street. David made his choice when he refused to cooperate, Petrov continued. His family will pay the price for his principles, just as your family is paying the price for yours. Elena felt something breaking inside her chest. Not her heart, that had broken already. Something deeper. Something that had been holding her together through everything that had happened. How do we stop this? She whispered. You don't, Petrov said simply. This ends when everyone who's seen our financial records is dead, when every copy of our data is destroyed, and when we're certain that no one will ever again make the mistake of thinking they can threaten us with exposure. Marcus was staring at the tablet, watching his sister lying unconscious in a hospital bed, guarded by men who would kill her the moment Petrov gave the word. Please, he said, and Elena heard 15 years of planning and purpose collapse into pure desperation. Please don't hurt her. Kill me, but let Victoria live. She doesn't know anything that could hurt you. Victoria knows everything, Miguel. Just as you know everything. Just as Ms. Blackwood knows everything. Petrov turned the tablet off and set it aside. The only question remaining is whether your deaths will be quick and relatively painless, or whether they'll serve as examples to discourage future interference. Elena looked at Marcus, saw the defeat in his eyes, the terrible understanding that his quest for justice had led them all to destruction. But she also saw something else. Something that made her remember why she'd fallen in love with David Chen 6 years ago in a university library. She saw the moment when someone decides that some things are worth dying for. There's a third option, Elena said quietly. Petrov raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. You let David's family live. You let Agent Santos live. You let David serve his federal sentence and disappear into the prison system. Elena met Petrov's eyes without flinching. And Marcus and I disappear permanently. No bodies to investigate, no evidence to examine. Just 2 people who vanished without a trace. And in exchange? In exchange, we give you something more valuable than our silence. Elena's voice was steady, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. We give you Richard Blackwood. The room went very quiet. My father knows where all the bodies are buried, Elena continued. He has backup files, secondary accounts, emergency protocols you don't know about. He's been planning his own exit strategy for years, and he's gathered enough evidence to bring down everyone he's ever worked with. Your father is under federal surveillance. My father is Richard Blackwood. He's been planning contingencies since before you knew his name. You think house arrest stops a man who's been moving money for international criminals for 15 years. Elena's laugh was bitter. He's been 3 steps ahead of you since the day this started. Petrov was listening now, his predator's instincts focused entirely on Elena. Richard has an insurance policy, she said. Evidence that would destroy not just your money laundering operation, but every criminal organization you've ever worked with. Names, dates, financial transfers, operational details. Everything. And you know where this insurance policy is? I'm his daughter. I'm the only person he trusts. Elena looked at Marcus, hoping he would understand what she was really saying. I can get you everything you need to eliminate Richard as a threat. Permanently. In exchange for the lives of people who mean nothing to me? In exchange for the guarantee that this problem will never surface again. Richard dead, the evidence destroyed, and everyone who could connect you to any of this either dead or too scared to ever speak. Petrov studied her for a long moment, and Elena held her breath. You have 12 hours, he said finally. Bring us Richard Blackwood's insurance policy, and we'll consider your proposal. And if I can't, then everyone dies, Ms. Blackwood. Your husband, his family, Agent Santos, Miguel, and you. Everyone who's ever heard the name of our organization dies in ways that will discourage others from following your example. As Petrov left them alone in the concrete room, Elena turned to Marcus and whispered, Do you trust me? Elena, what are you planning? I'm planning to save everyone I can save. She looked at the camera in the corner of the room, knowing their captors were watching. Even if it costs me everything. But what Elena didn't say, what she couldn't say with their enemies listening, was that Richard Blackwood's insurance policy wasn't hidden evidence. It was Elena herself, and she was about to bet everything on the hope that her father loved her more than he loved his own life. Asterisk, the descent into darkness is complete. Every alliance has been tested and broken, every plan has been compromised, and every choice has led to deeper disaster. Elena and Marcus are prisoners, David is helpless in federal detention, and innocent family members are being hunted by international killers. But sometimes the darkest moment is when heroes are born. Asterisk. The Blackwood estate, 6:47 a.m. Richard Blackwood sat in his study, watching the sunrise through bulletproof windows while his ankle monitor blinked its steady rhythm against his Italian leather shoes. The encrypted phone on his desk had been silent for 6 hours, which meant either his daughter was dead, or she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. He was betting on the mistake. The door to his study opened without a knock, and Elena walked in like she owned the house. Which, technically, she did. The estate was held in trust under her name for tax purposes. But this was the first time in her adult life that she'd entered her father's private space without permission. She looked different. Not just tired or stressed, but fundamentally changed. The soft uncertainty that had characterized her since childhood was gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. She moved like someone who'd learned that survival depended on controlling every variable in the room. Hello, Dad. Richard studied his daughter's face, noting the bruises on her wrists where zip ties had cut into her skin, the determined set of her jaw, the way she kept her hands visible but ready to move quickly. This wasn't the medicated, compliant Elena he'd been managing for years. This was the woman she might have become if he'd never intervened. Elena, I was beginning to worry. Were you? She pulled a chair across from his desk and sat down without invitation. Or were you counting on Petrov's people to solve your Elena problem permanently? Richard's expression didn't change, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. The insurance policy, Dad. The evidence you've been gathering for 15 years that could destroy every criminal organization you've ever worked with. Elena leaned forward, her voice deadly quiet. The evidence that Petrov thinks I can deliver to him. And can you? That depends. Elena reached into her jacket and pulled out a small digital recorder, setting it on the desk between them. On whether you love me more than you love your empire. Richard stared at the recorder, understanding flooding his features. You're wearing a wire. I'm wearing several wires. Audio, video, GPS tracking. Everything we say, everything we do in this room is being broadcast live to multiple federal agencies. Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. Petrov thinks I'm here to steal your insurance policy. The FBI thinks I'm here to gather evidence against you. David thinks I'm here to sacrifice myself to save his family. And what are you really here to do? I'm here to offer you a choice, Dad. The same kind of choice you've been forcing on other people for 40 years. Richard reached for the encrypted phone, but Elena was faster. Her hand clamped down on his wrist with surprising strength. "You can call Petrov," she said conversationally. "You can tell him that I'm here, that the FBI is listening, that his operation has been completely compromised. You can warn him to run, to abandon his networks, to cut his losses and disappear. And if I do? If you do, Petrov escapes, but his organization collapses. His money laundering networks are exposed. His criminal clients lose billions of dollars in hidden assets, and a lot of very dangerous people start looking for someone to blame." Elena's grip on his wrist tightened. "They'll blame you, Dad. They'll blame the man who was supposed to keep their secrets safe." Richard tried to pull his hand away, but Elena didn't let go. "Or," she continued, "you can choose differently. You can choose to let Petrov walk into the trap that's waiting for him. You can choose to help the FBI bring down the people who've been using you for 15 years. You can choose to finally do something that protects your daughter instead of controlling her. Elena, you don't understand the forces you're playing with. I understand perfectly." Elena's voice carried 15 years of suppressed rage. "I understand that you've been drugging me since I was 19 to keep me compliant. I understand that you've been using my medical records to manipulate everyone around me. I understand that you had Marcus's brother killed when he got too close to your operation." Richard's face went pale. "Miguel Santos told you that?" "Miguel Santos told me a lot of things. But do you know what he didn't tell me?" Elena leaned closer, her eyes burning with fury. "He didn't tell me that you've been planning to eliminate me for 2 years. The silence that followed was deafening. The medication wasn't just to keep me compliant, was it, Dad? It was to establish a medical history of mental instability. Depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. All carefully documented by your pet doctor. All building toward the day when your partners decided I was too much of a liability to keep alive." Richard's voice was barely a whisper. "Elena, you were going to have me killed and make it look like suicide. The crazy daughter who couldn't handle the pressure of her husband's crimes, who took an overdose of her prescribed medications in a moment of despair." Elena's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Very clean. Very believable. Very permanent. I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself." Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "From me, from the possibility that I might someday become inconvenient. From the chance that your daughter might grow up to have a conscience." Richard reached for the encrypted phone again, but Elena was ready for him. This time, she didn't grab his wrist. She grabbed the phone and threw it against the wall, where it shattered into pieces. "Choose, Dad. Right now. Choose between protecting the criminals who were planning to murder your daughter, or protecting the daughter who's giving you one last chance to be a real father." Richard stared at the remains of his phone, then at Elena, then at the window where FBI surveillance teams were undoubtedly watching every move. "You don't know what you're asking me to do," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to choose love over money. I'm asking you to choose family over power. I'm asking you to choose the person you used to be before you became a monster. And if I refuse?" Elena pulled out her own phone and showed him the screen. A text message, ready to send. Asterisk, Petrov's location is 47 Industrial Boulevard, Warehouse Complex C. He's expecting me in 1 hour. Come now. Asterisk. If you refuse, I send this message to the FBI tactical team that's been tracking Petrov's organization for 6 months. They raid the warehouse, they arrest everyone they find, and they discover that Alexander Petrov has been dead for 3 hours. Richard's eyes widened. "What? I killed him, Dad. Last night, when he was transporting me from the library to the warehouse. I used a piece of broken plastic from my zip ties to cut his carotid artery." Elena's voice was matter of fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "Turns out all those chemistry classes you forced me to take taught me a lot about human anatomy." The blood drained from Richard's face. "Elena, what have you done?" "What you taught me to do. I eliminated a threat." Elena put her phone away and sat back down. "Petrov's men think he's negotiating with the FBI for safe passage out of the country. The FBI thinks he's holding me and Marcus hostage while demanding ransom. But Petrov is bleeding out in an abandoned subway tunnel, and in about 45 minutes, everyone is going to realize that this whole situation has spun completely out of control." Richard was staring at his daughter as if he'd never seen her before. "You're lying." "Am I?" Elena pulled out another phone. Petrov's phone, cracked screen and blood on the case. 37 missed calls from his associates. 12 text messages asking for status updates. They're getting nervous, Dad. They're starting to wonder if their boss has been compromised. Elena, if Petrov is dead, if his people think we killed him, they'll hunt down everyone connected to this operation and eliminate them. Yes, I know. Elena's smile was cold as Arctic wind. They'll start with you, since you're the one who brought them David's evidence in the first place. Then they'll kill David's family, Agent Santos, Marcus, and me. They'll burn down everything and everyone to make sure there are no witnesses. Richard was struggling to process what his daughter was telling him. Unless we give them what they really want. Not just Petrov's killer, but proof that the entire network has been compromised. Evidence that every financial record, every client list, every operational detail has been copied and distributed to law enforcement agencies worldwide. That would destroy everything I've built. Everything you've built was already destroying you. Elena's composure finally cracked, years of suppressed emotion pouring out like water through a broken dam. It turned you into someone who drugs his own daughter. It turned you into someone who works with murderers and terrorists. It turned you into someone who was planning to have me killed rather than risk me becoming inconvenient. Richard sat in silence, watching his daughter rage against everything he'd spent 40 years creating. I loved you, Elena continued, tears streaming down her face. Even when you were controlling me, even when you were manipulating me, even when you were slowly poisoning me with medication I didn't need, I still loved you. Because I thought, somewhere underneath all the crimes and the lies and the cruelty, there was still my father. Still the man who used to read me bedtime stories and teach me to ride a bicycle. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks of dirt and blood on her cheeks. But there isn't, is there? That man is gone. He's been gone for so long that I don't even remember what he looked like. Richard stood up slowly, his ankle monitor beeping as he moved toward the window. Outside, he could see FBI surveillance vans, tactical vehicles, news crews who'd somehow learned about the standoff. The empire he'd built was collapsing around him in real time. What do you want me to do, Elena? I want you to call your contacts in Petrov's organization. I want you to tell them that the network has been compromised, that law enforcement has everything, and that their only option is to surrender or run. Elena's voice was steady again, but Richard could hear the exhaustion underneath. I want you to help the FBI bring down the people who've been using our family as a front for their crimes. And in exchange? In exchange, I testify that you were coerced into cooperation, that you were threatened, manipulated, forced to participate against your will. Elena met his eyes. I lie to protect you, the way you taught me to lie to protect myself. Richard turned away from the window, looking at his daughter with something that might have been pride if it hadn't been so deeply mixed with regret. Elena, if I do this, if I help bring down these people, they'll kill us both within a week. No, they won't. Elena stood up and moved to stand beside him at the window. Because we're going to disappear. New identities, new lives, witness protection for the rest of our lives. The FBI has already agreed to the arrangement. What about David? David goes free. The charges against him are dropped, the evidence of his innocence is revealed, and he gets to rebuild his life. Elena's voice caught slightly. Without me. Richard finally understood. You're sacrificing your marriage to save him. I'm sacrificing everything to save everyone I can save. David, his family, Agent Santos, Marcus, even you. Elena's smile was heartbreaking in its sadness. It's what you taught me to do, Dad. You taught me that love means making impossible choices. Richard reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a burner phone Elena had never seen before. If I make this call, he said quietly, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything ends. Everything already ended, Dad. The question is whether we choose how it ends, or whether we let other people choose for us. Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw strength he'd never recognized, courage he'd tried to suppress, and love he'd never deserved. He dialed the number. Federal Detention Center, same time. David sat in his cell, staring at the wall, when the guard appeared at his door. Chun, you're being released. David looked up in disbelief. What? Charges dropped. All of them. Apparently, some new evidence came to light. The guard unlocked the cell door. Your lawyer's waiting for you in processing. As David walked through the corridors toward freedom, his mind raced through possibilities. Elena had succeeded somehow. She'd found a way to expose the truth, to clear his name, to bring down the people who'd been hunting them. But as he reached the processing area and saw Jennifer Park waiting for him with documents and a grim expression, David realized that freedom might come with a price he wasn't prepared to pay. David, Jennifer said quietly. There's something you need to know about Elena. Warehouse Complex, Industrial Boulevard. Marcus sat in the same concrete room where he'd been held prisoner, but the dynamic had completely changed. The zip ties were gone, replaced by FBI identification badges. The men who'd been his captors were now his protection detail. Agent Victoria Santos, his sister, awake and mobile despite her injuries, sat across from him, coordinating the largest federal raid in decades. Petrov's organization is in complete chaos, she reported. Without their leader, without their financial networks, without their operational security, they're surrendering faster than we can process them. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the phone in his hand. Elena's last message, sent 3 hours ago, *, take care of David. Make sure he knows this isn't his fault. Make sure he knows I love him. *. Victoria, Marcus said quietly. Elena's not coming back, is she? His sister looked up from her reports, her expression gentle but honest. Elena made a choice, Miguel. She chose to save everyone she could save, even when it meant sacrificing everything she wanted. Just like our brother did. Just like our brother did. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about justice and revenge, about love and sacrifice, about the price of doing the right thing in a world that rewarded corruption. Roberta would have been proud of Elena Blackwood. Roberta would have been proud of them all. The Blackwood estate, final moments. Richard Blackwood finished his phone call and set the burner phone on his desk. Outside, FBI tactical teams were moving into position around the warehouse where Petrov's remaining associates were waiting for orders that would never come. It's done, he said to Elena. The network is finished. The arrests will begin within the hour. Elena nodded, then walked to her father's safe and input the combination she'd memorized as a child. Inside, she found what she was looking for. 2 sets of documents, 2 new identities, 2 tickets to a life that would never include the people she loved most. Elena, Richard said quietly, I'm sorry. For everything. For the medication, for the control, for trying to turn you into someone you were never meant to be. Elena looked at her father, this man who'd shaped her life through manipulation and cruelty, who'd loved her in the only way he knew how, who'd finally chosen her over his empire when it mattered most. I know, Dad, she said simply. I forgive you. As FBI agents prepared to escort them to a new life under federal protection, Elena looked out the window toward the city where David was walking free, where Marcus and Victoria were building cases against international criminals, where justice was finally being served. She'd saved everyone she could save, even if it cost her everything she'd ever wanted. The impossible choice had been made, and love, in its strange and painful way, had conquered everything. But victory through sacrifice leaves wounds that never fully heal. Elena has saved everyone, but at the cost of her own happiness. David is free, but without the woman who gave up everything to protect him. The criminals are caught, but the heroes must live with the knowledge that doing the right thing sometimes means losing everything that makes life worth living. 6 months later, FBI Field Office, Manhattan. David Chun sat in the same conference room where this nightmare had begun, but everything about the situation had changed. The case files spread across the table documented the largest international criminal takedown in Bureau history. 47 arrests across 12 countries. Billions of dollars in seized assets. Criminal networks that had operated for decades dismantled in a matter of weeks. Agent Victoria Santos sat across from him, her recovery from Petrov's attack complete, her satisfaction evident as she reviewed the final prosecutorial reports. 96 convictions, she said, closing the last file. No plea deals, no reduced sentences, no early releases. Every single person involved in the network is going to federal prison for the rest of their lives. David nodded, trying to feel the satisfaction that should come with complete victory. And Elena? Victoria's expression softened. Elena and Richard are safe. New identities, new lives, federal protection for as long as they need it. But I can't contact her. I can't know where she is, what name she's using, whether she's okay. David's voice carried 6 months of accumulated grief. As far as my life is concerned, my wife is dead. David, I know she made the right choice. I know she saved everyone, including me. I know that if she'd done anything differently, we'd all be dead right now. David stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had once felt like home. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are very different things. Victoria studied David's profile, noting the weight loss, the gray threading through his hair, the way he carried himself like a man who'd survived a war but lost everything worth fighting for. David, there's something I need to tell you. Something about Elena's plan that we couldn't reveal until now. David turned back to face her, and Victoria saw hope flicker in his eyes for the first time in months. Elena didn't just sacrifice herself to save everyone, Victoria continued. She did something much more complicated than that. Something that required us to maintain the fiction of her disappearance until we could be absolutely certain it was safe. What are you talking about? Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Before Elena went into witness protection, she spent 3 weeks working with our forensic accountants and international crime analysts. She didn't just help us identify Petrov's network. She helped us trace every single financial connection, every criminal partnership, every operational detail that could possibly threaten her or David in the future. David's heart began racing. Victoria, what are you saying? I'm saying that Elena didn't just burn down one criminal organization. She burned down the entire ecosystem that made organizations like Petrov's possible. Victoria opened the envelope and spread documents across the table. Swiss banks that facilitated money laundering, shut down and prosecuted. Shell corporations that hid criminal assets, dissolved and seized. Corrupt government officials who provided protection, arrested and convicted. David stared at the documents, seeing financial networks that spanned continents, criminal enterprises that had operated for decades, all systematically dismantled through evidence that Elena had helped compile. She spent 6 months in witness protection building the most comprehensive case against international financial crime in history, Victoria continued. Not just to protect herself and Richard, but to eliminate every possible threat to the people she loved. David, a familiar voice said from the conference room doorway, she did it to come home. David turned, and his world stopped. Elena stood in the doorway, but she looked different than she had 6 months ago. Stronger somehow. More confident. Her hair was shorter, darker, and she moved with the assured grace of someone who'd learned to navigate the most dangerous environments imaginable. But her eyes, her storm-gray eyes, were exactly the same. "Hello, husband," she said softly. David couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Couldn't process that the woman he'd been mourning for 6 months was standing 10 feet away from him, real and alive, and somehow more beautiful than he remembered. "Elena," he whispered. She smiled, and David felt 6 months of grief and despair shatter like glass. "The federal prosecutor closed the last international case yesterday," Elena said, walking toward him. 17 countries have agreed to permanent asset seizures. Every bank, every shell company, every criminal partnership that could possibly reconstitute Petrov's network has been eliminated. David reached for her, his hands shaking. "You're real. You're actually here." "I'm here." Elena let him pull her into his arms, breathing in the scent of his cologne, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her cheek. "And I'm never leaving again. But witness protection, your father, the danger. Dad's safe." The charges against him were dropped in exchange for his cooperation, but more importantly, there's no one left to threaten him. The criminal networks he was involved with don't exist anymore. Elena pulled back to look at David's face. "We eliminated them all, David. Every single person who might have wanted revenge, every organization that might have targeted our family, every threat that could have forced us to live in hiding." David was crying now, 6 months of suppressed emotion pouring out in waves. "I thought I'd lost you forever. I thought doing the right thing had cost me everything that mattered." "Doing the right thing did cost us," Elena said gently. "It cost us 6 months apart. It cost us the naive belief that we could expose corruption without becoming targets ourselves. It cost us the luxury of living simple, uncomplicated lives." She wiped tears from his cheeks with her thumbs. "But it also gave us something we never had before. It gave us the absolute certainty that we can survive anything together. It gave us the knowledge that our love is stronger than money, more powerful than fear, more enduring than the worst things people can do to each other." David kissed her then, desperate and grateful and disbelieving. Elena kissed him back with 6 months of accumulated longing, with the fierce joy of a woman who'd gambled everything on love and won. When they finally broke apart, Victoria was smiling at them from across the table. "There's one more thing," she said. "Elena's work with the International Task Force has been so valuable that she's been offered a permanent position as a consultant with the Financial Crimes Division. If she wants it." Elena looked at David. "What do you think? Ready to spend our lives fighting financial criminals together?" David laughed, the sound rusty from months of disuse. I think that sounds like the perfect career for a woman who brought down a $1 billion criminal empire to save her marriage. Actually, Elena said, her eyes sparkling with mischief, I brought down a $12 billion criminal empire. But who's counting? Meanwhile, the Blackwood estate. Richard Blackwood sat in his study, but the room felt different now. The bulletproof windows had been replaced with normal glass. The encrypted phones were gone, replaced by a single landline that connected him to the outside world without subterfuge or fear. The ankle monitor had been removed weeks ago, but Richard had chosen to stay in the house anyway. Some prisons, he'd learned, were more comfortable than freedom when freedom came with the knowledge of what you'd done to earn it. His phone rang, and Richard smiled when he saw Elena's number on the caller ID. Hello, sweetheart. Hi, Dad. How are you feeling? Old, Richard said honestly. Tired. Strangely peaceful. He paused. Proud of you. Dad. Elena, I need to say this. I spent 40 years building an empire based on lies, manipulation, and the exploitation of other people's weaknesses. I told myself I was protecting our family, providing for your future, ensuring that you'd never want for anything. Richard stood up and walked to the window, looking out at gardens that Elena had designed when she was 16. But what I was really doing was building a monument to my own fear. Fear that I wasn't enough, that I couldn't provide for my family through honest work, that the world would destroy us if we didn't destroy it first. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because in 6 months of thinking about what I've done, what I've lost, what I almost destroyed, I've realized something important. Richard's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the emotion underneath. I spent 40 years trying to protect you from the world, when what I should have been doing was teaching you how to change the world. Elena was quiet, listening to her father speak with an honesty she'd never heard from him before. You did what I never could, Elena. You looked at an impossible situation and found a way to save everyone without compromising your principles. You faced down international criminals, outsmarted federal agents, manipulated billionaires, and brought down criminal empires, all while refusing to become the kind of person who hurts innocent people. I learned from the best teacher, Elena said softly. You taught me how to think strategically, how to plan for contingencies, how to see opportunities that other people miss. I just used those skills for better purposes than you did. Richard laughed, a sound Elena had rarely heard. You used those skills the way I should have used them. The way I would have used them if I hadn't been so afraid of losing everything that I lost sight of what was worth keeping. Dad, are you okay? Living alone, staying in the house? I'm learning to be okay. I have a therapist, a real one, not a criminal psychiatrist who prescribes medication for imaginary conditions. I have books, gardens, time to think about who I want to be for whatever years I have left. Richard paused. And I have a daughter who calls me every week despite everything I put her through. Dad, I forgive you. For all of it. The medication, the control, the manipulation. I understand why you did it, even if I can't condone it. I know you do, sweetheart. And that forgiveness is more than I deserve. It's exactly what you deserve. Because despite everything else, despite all the mistakes and crimes and terrible choices, you chose me in the end. When it mattered most, you chose love over power. Richard wiped tears from his eyes, grateful that Elena couldn't see him crying. I love you, Elena. I'm proud of the woman you've become, and I'm grateful every day that you turned out better than your father. I love you too, Dad. And I'm proud that when you had the chance to be better, you took it. After Elena hung up, Richard sat in his study for a long time, thinking about redemption and second chances, about the difference between protecting someone and controlling them, about the courage it takes to admit you've been wrong for 40 years. He thought about his daughter, who'd saved his life by destroying his empire. He thought about David, who'd risked everything for justice and somehow emerged with his integrity intact. He thought about love, and how it sometimes required you to become a completely different person than you'd always been. Outside his window, the gardens Elena had designed were blooming with flowers she'd planted before she knew about crime and corruption and the price of doing the right thing. The flowers were still beautiful. Some things survived, even when everything else changed. FBI field office, later that evening. Marcus Rivera sat in his office, looking through case files for their next investigation. The Petrov network was finished, but financial crime never slept. There were always new criminals to investigate, new networks to expose, new ways that greed tried to disguise itself as legitimate business. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years, Marcus wasn't thinking about justice or revenge or the brother he'd lost to criminal violence. He was thinking about Elena and David, who'd somehow found their way back to each other despite impossible odds. He was thinking about Victoria, who'd recovered from her injuries and thrown herself back into the work with twice her previous determination. He was thinking about Richard Blackwood, who'd chosen to become a better person even when it cost him everything he'd spent his life building. But mostly, he was thinking about the phone call he'd received that afternoon from Elena. "Marcus," she'd said, "I have a proposal for you." "I'm listening." "David and I are starting a foundation. We're using the reward money from the Petrov case to create an organization that helps families who've been victims of financial crime. Legal assistance, counseling services, financial planning, everything we wished we'd had when this nightmare started." Marcus had smiled. "That sounds like exactly what the world needs. We want you to run it. You and Victoria, if she's interested. We want to turn your expertise in hunting financial criminals into expertise in helping their victims." "Elena." "Marcus, I know you've spent 5 years focused on revenge. But revenge is finished now. The people who killed your brother are in prison forever. The question is what you do with the rest of your life." Marcus had considered her offer, thinking about Roberto, about justice and healing, about the difference between destroying criminals and helping the people they'd hurt. "Can I think about it?" "Take all the time you need." "But Marcus, thank you. For everything. For protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protection. For believing that justice was possible even when it seemed impossible. For being willing to sacrifice your own happiness to keep other people safe. Elena, I manipulated you. I used you to get to your father. You loved me enough to spend 15 years trying to protect me from my own family. You may have lied about your name and your history, but you never lied about caring about me." Elena's voice had been gentle but firm. "You're a good man, Marcus. You've just been so focused on punishing bad people that you forgot there are other ways to make the world better." Now, sitting in his office with case files spread around him, Marcus made his decision. He picked up his phone and dialed Elena's number. "Elena? It's Marcus. Victoria and I accept your offer." "Really? Really? It's time to start helping people instead of just hunting criminals." "Marcus, that's wonderful. David will be so excited. We can start planning." "Elena," Marcus interrupted gently, "there's something I need to tell you first. Something about you and David and the future you're building together." "What is it?" Marcus smiled, looking out his office window at the city lights. "I'm proud of you. Both of you. You took the worst thing that could happen to your lives and turned it into an opportunity to help other people. You chose love over fear, hope over revenge, building something positive over just tearing down something negative. Marcus, your brother would have been proud too. Roberto always believed that the best way to honor victims was to prevent more victims. You and David are going to save families that we never could have saved just by arresting criminals." "We're going to save them together," Elena corrected. "All of us. Because that's what family does." Marcus closed his eyes, thinking about family, the one he'd lost and the one he'd found. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's exactly what family does." David and Elena's apartment, midnight. David woke up in the middle of the night and reached across the bed, his heart stopping for a moment when he didn't immediately feel Elena beside him. 6 months of living without her had trained his subconscious to expect absence, to prepare for the devastating moment when he'd remember she was gone. But Elena was just in the bathroom, brushing her teeth before bed. David watched her through the open doorway, still amazed that she was real, that she was home, that their story had somehow ended with love triumphant instead of love destroyed. "Having trouble sleeping?" Elena asked, noticing him watching her. "Just making sure you're real." Elena finished brushing her teeth and came back to bed, curling up against David's chest in the position they'd perfected over 4 years of marriage. "I'm real," she murmured against his skin. "We're real. This life we're building together is real." David held her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "During those 6 months in witness protection, when you were building the case against the international networks, were you ever tempted to just stay hidden? To start a new life somewhere safe and never look back?" Elena was quiet for a moment, and David could feel her thinking. "Every day," she said finally. "Every morning I woke up knowing that coming back to you meant risking everything all over again. That building a life together meant accepting that we'd always be people who'd seen the worst of the world, who'd been changed by experiences that most people never have. But you came back anyway. I came back because I realized something during those months apart. Elena lifted her head to look at David's face in the dim light filtering through their bedroom window. I realized that I'd rather have a complicated, dangerous, uncertain life with you than a safe, simple, predictable life without you. David kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips. Besides, Elena continued with a smile, someone had to make sure you didn't try to take on any more international criminal conspiracies without backup. David laughed. I think I've had enough international criminal conspiracies for one lifetime. Good. Because I've got plans for our next adventure, and they don't involve anyone trying to kill us. What kind of plans? Elena's smile widened. The kind that involve helping families, building something positive, maybe starting a family of our own someday. The kind that involve living the life we always wanted instead of just surviving the life we never expected. David held his wife close, thinking about the future they were going to build together. A future where doing the right thing didn't mean sacrificing everything you loved. A future where love really could conquer the worst things the world had to offer. A future where two people who'd started as strangers in a university library could end up saving each other from forces they'd never imagined facing. I love you, Elena Chun, David whispered into the darkness. I love you too, David Chun, she whispered back. And for the first time in 6 months, David fell asleep without checking to make sure Elena was still beside him. Because he finally believed she always would be. The impossible has become inevitable. Love has conquered international criminal conspiracies. Family bonds have proven stronger than money and power. Justice has been served without destroying the people who fought for it. The broken have been healed, the separated have been reunited, and the future stretches ahead full of possibility instead of fear. 2 years later, Chun Foundation Boardroom, Manhattan. The financial analysis shows irregularities in 17 different accounts spanning 8 countries, David said, pointing to the presentation screen where complex financial charts revealed patterns of criminal behavior. Classic money laundering operation, using shell companies and offshore accounts to hide the proceeds from human trafficking. Around the conference table sat 12 people whose lives had been forever changed by their battle against Richard Blackwood's criminal empire. Elena sat at David's right hand, her eyes sharp with the intelligence that had once been dulled by unwanted medication. Marcus Rivera occupied the chief investigator's chair, his expertise in financial crime now focused on helping victims instead of hunting perpetrators. Victoria Santos participated via video link from the FBI field office, where she'd been promoted to head the International Financial Crimes Division. But the most remarkable presence in the room was Richard Blackwood himself, participating via secure video call from his home office, where he spent his days using 40 years of criminal expertise to help law enforcement agencies worldwide dismantle the networks he'd once been part of. The shell company structure is identical to the Petrov network, Richard said from his screen, his voice carrying the authority of hard-won experience. Same banking relationships, same operational protocols. This is definitely a resurrection attempt by former associates. David looked around the table at the faces of people who'd become his family through shared trauma and triumph. The Chun Foundation had grown from Elena's idea into a multinational organization that helped families destroyed by financial crime. They provided legal assistance, counseling services, financial planning, and most importantly, the kind of justice that courts couldn't always deliver. Maria, David said to a young woman sitting at the far end of the table, can you tell us about your family's experience with this network? Maria Santos, no relation to Marcus and Victoria, but connected by the universal experience of victimization, stood up with the confidence of someone who'd learned to transform pain into purpose. My parents were recruited as money mules when I was 15, she said, her voice steady despite the difficulty of the subject. They thought they were helping with legitimate international business transfers. By the time they realized what was happening, the criminals had compromising information about our entire family. She paused, gathering strength from the supportive faces around the table. They forced my parents to continue laundering money for 3 years. When my father finally tried to go to the police, they threatened to have my little brother kidnapped and sold into human trafficking. Maria's voice grew stronger. The Chun Foundation helped us escape, helped us rebuild our lives, and most importantly, helped us understand that we weren't criminals, we were victims. Elena reached across the table and squeezed Maria's hand. And now you're helping other families understand the same thing. Now I'm making sure no other 15-year-old has to watch their parents become prisoners in their own lives. Maria sat back down, her expression determined. This network destroyed my childhood, but it's not going to destroy anyone else's. David felt the familiar surge of purpose that had driven him through 2 years of building something positive from the wreckage of their former lives. The Chun Foundation had helped over 300 families escape financial crime operations. They'd worked with law enforcement to shut down dozens of criminal networks. They'd turned their personal nightmare into a mission that was saving lives around the world. The question, Elena said, studying the financial charts, is how we approach this particular network. Traditional law enforcement could take years to build a case, and in the meantime, families like Maria's continue to suffer. We could use the Blackwood Protocol, Marcus suggested, referring to the Foundation's signature approach to rapid intervention. The Blackwood Protocol was named after Richard's contribution to their work, a strategy that used insider knowledge of criminal operations to expose networks quickly and comprehensively. It involved carefully orchestrated financial pressure, strategic media exposure, and targeted law enforcement intervention that could dismantle entire operations in a matter of weeks instead of years. With one modification, Victoria's voice came through the video link. We've identified the leader of this network, Alexander Volkov, former associate of Petrov's organization. He's currently operating out of Dubai, but he's planning to expand into the United States through a legitimate-looking investment firm. David and Elena exchanged glances, remembering another legitimate-looking business operation that had hidden terrible crimes. Personal approach? Elena asked. Personal approach, David confirmed. The personal approach was the Foundation's most dangerous, but most effective intervention strategy. David and Elena would pose as potential clients or business partners, gaining direct access to criminal operations while wearing recording devices and gathering evidence that law enforcement could use immediately. It was risky. It required them to walk back into the kind of situation that had nearly destroyed them 2 years ago. But it was also the fastest way to save the families currently being victimized by Volkov's network. I'll go, Elena said, but David was already shaking his head. We go together. We always go together. Marcus leaned forward in his chair. David, Elena, you don't have to put yourselves at risk again. We have other operatives, other approaches. No, Elena said firmly. This is what we do. This is who we are. We're the people who walk into dangerous situations so other people don't have to. Besides, David added with a smile that had become legendary among the Foundation staff, we're pretty good at taking down international criminal networks. The room erupted in laughter, the kind of easy camaraderie that could only exist among people who'd survived the worst together and come out stronger. There's one more thing, Richard's voice cut through the laughter, drawing everyone's attention back to his video screen. Something you should know about Alexander Volkov before you decide to take him on directly. The room went quiet. Volkov was the one who ordered the hit on Roberto Santos 5 years ago. He was Petrov's operational commander, the man who decided which threats needed to be eliminated permanently. Richard's expression was grave. He's not just another financial criminal. He's a killer who uses money laundering to fund much worse crimes. Marcus's face had gone completely still. Then we end him. We end his operation, Elena corrected gently. We save his victims. We bring him to justice. But we don't become the kind of people who eliminate threats permanently. Elena's right, Victoria added from her screen. We're not them. We're better than them. That's what makes us dangerous to people like Volkov. They understand murder and intimidation and corruption, but they don't understand people who can't be bought, threatened, or turned. David stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. 2 years ago, he'd stood in a different boardroom, in a different building, and watched his life collapse around him. Today, he stood in a boardroom he'd helped design, surrounded by people he'd helped save, planning an operation that would protect families he'd never meet. All in favor of the Dubai operation? He asked, turning back to the table. Every hand went up. Even Richard, visible on his video screen, raised his hand in solidarity with the organization that had grown from his daughter's courage and his son-in-law's principles. Motion carried, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned to command rooms full of powerful people. David and I leave for Dubai next week. Marcus and Victoria coordinate with international law enforcement. Richard provides operational intelligence and strategic consultation. She paused, looking around the table at the faces of people who'd become her chosen family. And everyone remembers that we're not just shutting down another criminal network. We're saving families. We're preventing children from growing up the way Maria grew up, the way I grew up, afraid of the people who were supposed to protect them. As the meeting broke up and people began filing out of the boardroom, David found himself alone with Elena for a moment. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing the question she'd asked him 2 years ago in their apartment. "About taking on another dangerous mission? About risking our lives to help strangers? About building our entire future around fighting the kind of people who tried to destroy us?" Elena smiled and pulled him close. "Not even one." "Good," David said, kissing her forehead. "Because I have an announcement to make." "What kind of announcement?" David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "The kind that means our next mission is going to include a very important team member." Elena stared at the box, then at David's face. "David Chun, are you proposing to me in the same boardroom where we're planning to take down an international criminal?" "Elena Chun, I'm proposing that we renew our vows before we risk our lives again. I'm proposing that we make promises to each other that account for everything we've learned about love and danger and the price of doing the right thing." David opened the box, revealing not an engagement ring, but 2 matching wedding bands engraved with words Elena couldn't read from this distance. "I'm proposing that we promise to keep saving each other, keep saving other people, and keep believing that love is stronger than anything the world can throw at us." Elena took one of the rings and read the engraving. Asterisk, in every boardroom, in every battle, in every choice between love and fear. Asterisk. "David," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "yes. To all of it. To renewing our vows, to taking on Volkov, to spending the rest of our lives walking into danger together, because it's the right thing to do." They slipped the new rings onto each other's fingers, sealing promises that had been tested by international criminals, federal investigations, family betrayals, and 6 months of separation. Promises that had survived everything and emerged stronger. "Mrs. Chun," David said formally, "ready for our next adventure?" "Mr. Chun," Elena replied with equal formality. "I've been ready since the day you taught me that organic chemistry was just another kind of puzzle to solve." Epilogue Dubai 3 weeks later. David and Elena sat in the opulent lobby of the Burj Al Arab, posing as wealthy American investors interested in Alexander Volkov's legitimate investment opportunities. Elena wore a designer dress that concealed multiple recording devices, while David's expensive suit hid the kind of technology that would make FBI surveillance teams jealous. They looked like exactly what they were pretending to be: a successful couple with money to invest and few questions about where their returns came from. They also looked like exactly what they actually were: 2 people who'd learned that love meant facing danger together, that family meant protecting the vulnerable, and that doing the right thing meant accepting whatever consequences came with that choice. "Mr. Volkov will see you now," the receptionist announced. David and Elena stood up together, walking hand in hand toward whatever came next. Behind them, invisible but present, Marcus coordinated with international law enforcement, while Victoria prepared arrest warrants and Richard provided strategic intelligence from half a world away. They were no longer the people who'd walked into Richard Blackwood's boardroom 2 years ago. They were stronger, wiser, more dangerous to those who preyed on the innocent. They were people who'd chosen love over fear so many times that courage had become their default setting. But most importantly, they were people who'd learned that the greatest victories weren't about defeating enemies. They were about saving families, protecting the vulnerable, and proving that love really could conquer the worst things the world had to offer. As they walked toward Alexander Volkov's office, Elena squeezed David's hand. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he whispered back. And together, they walked into their next battle, knowing that whatever happened, they would face it the way they'd learned to face everything, together. 2 hours later, FBI Command Center, Dubai. "We have everything," Victoria announced through encrypted communications to the Chun Foundation team around the world. "Financial records, operational details, client lists, victim identification. Volkov's entire network is compromised." "Arrests?" Marcus asked from New York. "Simultaneous raids in 14 countries starting in 30 minutes. We're going to shut down the entire operation before anyone realizes what's happening." "And David and Elena?" Victoria smiled at her monitors, showing the couple walking calmly out of Volkov's building. Their mission accomplished, their cover intact, their marriage stronger than ever. David and Elena are exactly where they're supposed to be, together, making the world a safer place for families they'll never meet. As law enforcement agencies across 4 continents prepared to dismantle another international criminal network, as families trapped in financial crime operations prepared for freedom they didn't yet know was coming, as justice prepared to triumph over corruption once again, David and Elena Chen walked hand in hand through the streets of Dubai. They had learned that sometimes the biggest betrayals came from family. They had learned that sometimes the greatest victories required the greatest sacrifices. They had learned that doing the right thing often meant losing everything you thought you wanted. But most importantly, they had learned that love, real love, tested by fire and proven in battle, was stronger than money, more powerful than fear, and more enduring than any force the world could bring against it. The story that had begun with humiliation in a boardroom had become a love story that spanned continents and saved lives. The story that had started with one man standing up for what was right had become a foundation that helped hundreds of families find justice and healing. The story that had threatened to tear apart a marriage had instead forged a partnership that could face any challenge the world offered. And the best part? This was only the beginning. What did this story teach you about the power of choosing love over fear, even when that choice comes with devastating costs? About the strength that comes from standing up for what's right, even when it means losing everything you thought you wanted? About the way that true love doesn't just survive betrayal and danger. It grows stronger because of them? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. Because sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as the greatest losses. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose to love someone enough to risk everything for them. The Chun Foundation continues their work around the world, proving every day that love really can conquer the worst things humanity has to offer. And David and Elena Chen continue to walk hand in hand into whatever dangers await, knowing that together, they can face anything. Because that's what love does. It transforms ordinary people into heroes. It turns personal trauma into purpose. It proves that sometimes the best way to heal from being broken is to spend your life making sure no one else has to break the same way. What would you risk for love? What would you sacrifice for justice? What would you choose if you had to pick between your principles and your safety? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that doing the right thing is never wrong, even when it costs everything. Subscribe for more stories that prove love is the most powerful force in the universe. Because David and Elena's story isn't just about them. It's about all of us, and the choices we make when everything we love is on the line.